Well, good morning, everybody. Here's the plan for today's forecast video. We're going to walk through some of the bigger picture things, which thankfully have been relatively consistent over the last couple of days. We'll then get into some of the details of the models, but at the end of this, what I want to do is focus a bit on the hurricane season, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the kind of the new long-range weekly outlook for the month of August, although we're going to save some more of the in-depth dive for a little bit later once I've kind of reformed some of these ideas. Also, a little bit later than normal this morning, landed last night and sat on the tarmac for over an hour and a half. I think Chicago is still dealing with the effects of all of the backups we saw earlier in the week due to the derecho event that went through. But anyways, in the Midwest this morning, the whole of it, much cooler air. In fact, some parts of the upper Midwest got temperatures down into the 40s last night. Thinking about Minnesota, Wisconsin, the UP, very chilly air, drier air that's diving into this area. And honestly, it's going to be around for a little while here. Now, I will be showing you that the temperature pattern, I think, as we approach the end of the month, will evolve in a way to open up some heat back into the central United States. That should be expected. But overall, in the near term, things are kind of playing out like we've been thinking. It's kind of nice to wake up and look at an all hazards weather map that isn't entirely covered. We still have to focus on a few areas, though, like the flood watches that are out for parts of North Carolina and a little bit of Virginia. Same down here in parts of New Mexico, and then the excessive heat watches, warnings, and some air quality issues that are throughout the Western United States, which has been kind of an issue for quite some time now. On Friday, by the way, tomorrow, I am going to focus a bit on the West. I want to think a lot about what's going on there, how things have evolved, and give you some updates on some water resources just as a way to finish off the week. But the consistency is shown here, and this is what our next 2 weeks looks like according to the European ensemble. Drier areas, wetter areas. This has been a pretty solid story about the position of the larger Four Corners Ridge and its kind of repeat returns over the next several days. The kind of opening up of the Bermuda High, bringing in a lot of moisture. Initially, some drier and cooler air that sticks around in this area, promoting a frontal boundary that stalls here, which is why we see this region getting a pretty sizable increase in precipitation across this area. If we just take a look at the temperatures, this has also been quite consistent. Where the ridge is, major heat is building into the western part of North America, and this is going to be a problem for the wildfire issues that are still going on in northern Alberta. I'll show you those in a few moments. But there is some relief coming to this area. Just it's several days out from now, but we'll get to that in a moment. Much cooler air for much of the next 5 days, just anchored right around Iowa, Missouri, and all the surrounding states here. Get into day 5 through 10, we still see that, but just take note of where the heat is going to be pressing once we kind of get out there over the next 7 or 8 days. And then once we get into the end of this month, there's better evidence that the ridge opens and we see some very warm conditions to finish July and start August across the central part of North America, with maybe the only place hanging on to near normal temperatures being the south, which is already hot at the beginning of August anyway. Just as we've been discussing, the National Hurricane Center, continues to show no activity expected over the next 7 days, and a lot of that is due to all the dust that's coming off of the Sahara, plus the fact that over the top of this, we have positive velocity potentials. And that's one of the ways by which we measure if there's subsidence, which kind of suppresses convection and suppresses tropical activity, or if there is rising motion, which of course would take the lid off and let it go. So the subsidence combined with the dust is kind of just slowing things down a bit. Plus, we don't have very active African easterly waves rolling off of the west coast of Africa to initiate these storms. So we're going to put that on hold, and we'll talk about it again at the end of the video when I think the hurricane season is going to get going again. But right now, I just want to take you to yesterday's satellite data. And as we watch the sunset, very deep convection across the south. Look at these storms. I'll be driving down to Macon, Georgia tonight, and I'll be hoping that I'll get to drive through a few storms, something like this. We need this kind of convection this time of year. This is a major part of the water cycle of the southeast, the summer thunderstorm activity. If you're down here and watching, you know how this works, right? Most years, what we have every day is a 30 to 50% chance of getting a storm to pop over us in the afternoon. And as long as we keep the Gulf of Mexico open, that chance lives. This is the much drier air that's now invaded the Midwest here, and after a week of just terrible weather in the Northeast, we're going to start to calm things down a little bit here and back off on the severe storms. Meanwhile, yesterday, just take a look at the storms rolling in the high plains coming off of the Four Corners Ridge. And these storms, as long as that ridge is sitting there, we're going to watch the high plains and western plains for more of this. The deeper convection down in Texas, we're going to keep an eye out. There might be some very weak mesoscale low pressure developing here and rolling across parts of Louisiana, kind of concentrating the precipitation in a few areas. But as you get toward the sunset time frame, the smoke really becomes a bit more evident in the sky. Again, as I always say, it's a sun angle thing. So you get much more oblique sun angles. You get better scattering off of those smoke particles, and we can see them better when the sun sets. And just looking here at this is British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan. You can see yesterday, while this is all deep convection and deep thunderstorms, there's wildfire smoke in northern parts of British Columbia, mostly northern parts of Alberta. But that smoke just curling its way down here farther into Saskatchewan, eventually into the northern plains. When I was in South Dakota yesterday, you could see the haze in the sky driving home. In fact, it was what prevented me from really getting a good view over parts of Minnesota. I wanted to see what things look like. But as I was flying home, there was a lot of cloud. It doesn't look like much, but it's hard to see through some of this. And the smoke made so much haze that at our altitude we were flying, which was about right at sunset, right about here, I just couldn't get any good pictures. So I wanted to see how things looked, but didn't get the chance to do that. Into the west, again, we're going to talk a lot more about this tomorrow, but we can see there were some large storm systems that blew up here. So scattered, severe, strong storms. But you can see look at the wildfire here in Northern California, coming into Nevada, parts of Oregon, and then across much of eastern Montana, just the smoke from Canada kind of invading into this area. If we just take a quick look at the forecast for the next 48 hours of wildfire smoke, we're going to watch throughout the day today, getting into tomorrow, just the smoke coming out of Canada, hitting into the central U.S. And with the cooler, drier air in through here, this is what's also going to help knock back temperatures. You put that much particulate matter in the atmosphere, it's going to reflect some sunlight. It'll also absorb some of that sunlight in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, which is going to make for warmer conditions there rather than at the surface. But this is really just tracing out our pattern. There's our large Four Corners Ridge. There's the deeper trough that's kind of taken over and brought in the cooler air into the Great Lakes states and surrounding areas. And then notice out of the south, see how the flow's turning and making this run? That's where the Bermuda High has its influence. So let's just step through some recent precip maps. This is the last 24 hours. So we've kind of been watching that on satellite. Now you can kind of see what the rainfall looks like through 6 a.m. this morning. This is when we look back over the last 72 hours. So now we're including the rain from the Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, the derecho that went through this area. And if we step it back even farther, this is adding a whole week into this. Now we can actually see the system late last week that rolled through parts of North Carolina, Virginia. We can see the storms that set up before the derecho event, and we can also see this isolated convection across the southeast, plus the Four Corners ridging storms, which is just part of the summer monsoon there. I wanted to also look at just the last 30 days as a percent of normal, and this was through yesterday morning, because the importance of this upcoming forecast. As we talked about earlier, this region is forecast to be wetter than average going forward, largely thanks to the Bermuda High. And as we can just note here, there are several pockets in through here that are in very, very dry conditions. And so I'm anxious to see as I drive this afternoon, this evening through parts of Tennessee, for example. I'll go right through Nashville on my way down to Atlanta. So we'll kind of follow, 2475, this corridor. I'll be wanting just to see how things look in this area and get a good glimpse of the drought situation there. But the reality is that the Bermuda High is opened and it's strong. And even though the front has kind of dove through this area, we will be pumping moisture back into it. It'll overrun this, and we're going to get some storms along this area. Today's storm threat, though, is primarily going to be located here in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and then again around the big ridge that'll roll through here. So we're going to watch parts of Montana and then the western and high plains for severe storms. Tomorrow, much of the north central plains has a better chance of getting some stronger storms. Same kind of pattern discussion. And then once we get out here to day 3, which would be the 20th, broad area of just general thunderstorm risk, but right now the Storm Prediction Center only has a marginal risk out for Virginia and North Carolina. So let's just take a quick look back at the severe weather summary for reports, just to show you 136 tornadoes, over 2,000 reports of severe wind damage, of course, coming from really 3 big events. The derecho that hit here. This was another derecho that didn't get a lot of discussion, happened over the weekend last weekend, but came out of Montana and hit through this area. Then we had multiple strong wind reports throughout the Northeast. Now, that is not to ignore what has happened in parts of Nebraska, which we analyzed yesterday, or the strong winds that came through Kansas over toward Kansas City earlier in the month. It's just these are our most 3 recent events just to highlight here. So it's kind of nice to get a little bit of a calmer time period from having day after day of large areas of slight risk and moderate risks and the like. So let's take a look at the forecast radar, Playing this through, this will be this afternoon and this evening. So I'm hoping to kind of get into some of these storms, and these folks need these storms as well as that front sags. You can see this afternoon the storms building around the Four Corners high, and what will happen in the plains, we'll just have to keep an eye out on how these all evolve. But hopefully we'll be chasing some of these storms down here into, not chasing like to video, but I'll be chasing them to get down here to see how they come through parts of the southeast by this evening. Going into Friday and Saturday, this is Friday night, first of all. More isolated convection throughout the southeast, same setup. But it is important to note, look at the rains that we could be getting, Friday night to Saturday, right in through this area. And there's a region in through here that the models have picked up on having better chances of being wet in parts of Nebraska especially, but surrounding maybe bits of Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa as well. We can see it on the artificial intelligence forecasting system. While it's got certainly this wet corridor in through here, there's better chances of some storms that are coming through this region. I think rather than using the AIFS as the guidance here, I feel like the NBM and the WPC probably have it a bit more accurately. So the southwest monsoon on, we can now see that same wet corridor, but take a look at this region. That's the NBM and this is the WPC. Pretty consistent between these two modeling sources as to where that heavy precip could possibly be. It's also in the European, right there on the Nebraska-Iowa border. Same thing through this region we've been discussing. There's our southwest monsoonal storm pattern, and this is how it looks in the GFS. And if we compare the GFS to the European, there's differences, right? Look how much wetter the GFS is. That's what these colors represent down in Texas or in Missouri, also in parts of Arizona. Whereas the European, much wetter throughout the southeast overall, and then wetter back into Nebraska. So certainly some model differences there to be seen. And if we want to know which model's performing best, I like to show this. This, again, is made by Ryan Maui. I appreciate him letting me see his skill scores here. But just comparing the ECMWF to the GFS operational runs, the European has been performing much better as of late, but their current runs are pretty close. These two open circles right here at the very end. So let's go ahead and have a look at what's dominating the pattern. Then we'll show you those models, and then we'll work our way toward the end of this. So here's now, right? So there's our big Four Corners Ridge. There's the trough that's kind of driven itself through the Great Lakes states, getting down pretty far south now. And there's our expansive Bermuda High. So as we play this forward, getting into Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, what's promoting some of that, the better rain that you have in this area is this low. There's a trough that's right in through here that's diving down, and it's going to continue to live there, which is why for most of the next 5 days, this whole region is cooler than average. But the ridge starts to open up and pushes some of that heat more into the central Canadian prairie, while much of this section of the U.S. is cooler. Bermuda High is still here and quite strong into early next week, but take a look at the trough coming into the northwest. As that trough digs in next week, this is next Wednesday, Thursday, it is going to push the ridge out and open it up into the kind of the Great Plains and Midwest, while cooler air finally comes into the Pacific Northwest. And as it does so, we're going to temporarily displace this pattern around, the 24th, 25th, 26th of July. But at that point, what I'll be curious to see is about 10 days from now, is the influence of this trough on initiating some what could be pretty nasty storms into this area. And the reason why I'm thinking about this is because notice there's a ridge out ahead of it, with the ridge kind of anchored here, which means the Bermuda High should still be pumping moisture in on this side. And if it does, this is kind of a spring setup for severe storms. So we'll need to be watching. I would just call it the 27th, 28th, 29th right now. This will shift in time. It's not only in the artificial intelligence, it's also in the ECMWF ensemble, the GFS. They've all kind of got this same feature. But once we get past that, into early July, the atmosphere wants to go back to where it was, early August. So what does that mean? There's troughs here, Four Corners Ridge, trough in this area, Bermuda High. And so we're kind of seeing that pattern a bit more on repeat with time. So now let's get in and compare the two models, just looking out over the next 10 days. We've seen with the high-res NAM through Thursday into Friday, and there's that weak upper-level trough that's digging in, driving some rain into this area while the storms continue in parts of the southeast. That's Saturday getting into Sunday. So we're going to watch the Central Plains for storms on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday developing with that trough, and more persistent storms over the southeast through the weekend as well. Once we get into Monday and Tuesday, this is what I mean by an open Gulf. Just see the chances for getting rain when you have abundant moisture moving into the atmosphere. And this kicks out finally the drier air that was into the central United States right now by next Tuesday, Wednesday. And then that Bermuda high just keeps pumping right into this area. So all the way out to next Thursday and Friday and Saturday. I mean, I love doing this. This helps me. Sometimes I just go, let's watch it all fast. It just gives you a sense of the flow of the atmosphere, doesn't it? And what I see right now is a whole lot of this. And so that brings us back to some of these probability maps. So this is the chance over the next 10 days of an inch. And now we can highlight those main areas like the Four Corners states with the large ridge that's going to initiate the storms on the Front Range. We have what's going on here in Nebraska, Iowa. The storms that'll be all across the southeast, making it quite wet. Probability of 2 inches. Still very high over the next 10 days. Probability of 4. I mean, from parts of south central Texas all the way to the Carolinas, we're going to be hitting some very dry acres with much needed rainfall in this near-term forecast. Let's quickly look out there at week 2. We can see that the CPC and the European are in pretty good agreement. The GFS, though, notice how it is picking up on a signal in through here where I think there could be more storms in the northern plains showing up. We need to watch that carefully, especially because of the position of the trough that's diving in about 10 days from now. This may be too dry looking at that time frame, so we'll keep an eye out on that. But the CPC also suggests that from the 25th, 26th, 27th, a part of that week 2 pattern, there's a slight risk of having excessive precipitation, risk of heavy precipitation here. So we come back to a quick discussion on temperatures. We've already kind of seen the pattern, but look at the heat that's still in the northwest now, while there's much cooler, drier air just invading the midsection of the U.S. We get into tomorrow. It's the same story with the heat in the west, cool in the central United States and the east. There's Saturday. This is some rain-cooled air with cloud cover. While the heat stays in the northwest, it stays throughout the west. Sunday into Monday was when we start to see things change up, because by Tuesday, we've got that trough developing here. And that's the one that sweeps through. And by the time we get into the 24th, 25th, 26th, that time frame is when we're going to watch for the middle part of the country to kind of open up to some severe storms. Take a look at the European model, though, day 5 through 10, which is shown here, and then day 10 through 15. So you can start to see the influence of that ridge opening here, while the Bermuda high is still pumping there, and what this might mean for the risk of some stronger storms once we get out there to that last week of July. So pretty consistent forecast here between all the models. So that brings me to kind of some bigger picture things. Does the heat open back up in August to occupy more of the central U.S., or does it just keep re-anchoring in the western U.S. like it's done for so many weeks? Looking out here to the very end of the month, we start to see that NOAA has released a region in the northern plains getting into the Canadian prairie that has a slight risk of excessive heat, and we just have questions as to whether or not that's going to continue. Some of that will be answered by some shifting around in the tropics. So one of the things I'll be watching carefully for is this. The newest European ensemble from now through August 1st is beginning to show this. And what that is this seems to be some sort of convectively coupled wave moving out of, Indonesia and across the Pacific Ocean. And what it will do is it will likely remove the lid, which is this, sitting over the tropics. And so we need to be paying attention to how that migrates, because if it does, this could say that by the beginning of August, what comes off of Africa, what develops in the main development region of the Atlantic or the Gulf will now have much more access to better conditions aloft. And we already know the wind shear is low, and so we're going to have to keep an eye on what that could possibly do. It's pretty clear that throughout the month of August, the models are predicting lower pressure in this area, with the Bermuda high being stronger on its northern side, similarly with the Pacific high. And this is why there is some evidence that we're going to see more western U.S. ridging that at times will open into the central United States when you look at the upper level high pattern. This is the surface pressure pattern. So just want to show you some of the consistency in the model. This is the new 30-day update from the from the European, pretty same story as to what I've been sharing with you for a while. You see the drier, not dry, but drier conditions in through here. This is all just because the model is got some weak ridging that's going to live on the continental divide. I think that's what's really driving a lot of this right now. So from here, let's go back and take a look at the ocean temperatures. And I want to just discuss a few things. We've gotten much warmer in this area. We have our warm kind of North Pacific region here, and the North Atlantic remains quite warm. And I think the jet's going to try to live over the top of these things. And so if it stays in that configuration, this will likely keep more ridging west than it will allow it to just live in the central United States as we get into the month of August, based only on ocean temperatures. But there's a couple of other things that are moving this around a bit, and I got to watch the position of the Bermuda High very carefully during this time frame. We can see La Nina still trying to get going and get formed here. This is going to become a much bigger story, I think, later on in late summer and fall. But it is important to also note what's going on throughout this part of the Atlantic and the cooler water that's surfaced here. This is a part of an ocean circulation coupled with the atmosphere here, which we sometimes quantify as the AMM, the Atlantic Meridional Mode. And right now, as you just take a look at the June distribution, it's sitting out here, about 4 standard deviations above the mean. And why this is so important is because if you correlate August to October, the Atlantic Meridional Mode with sea level pressure, you can see this massive negative correlation here. So that means when the Atlantic Meridional Mode is high and very positive, atmospheric pressure is very low. And this is one of the key indicators that we're suggesting that the heart of the hurricane season, August, September, October, if we can get the suppressive lid off of this, the hurricane season is likely going to take off. And it could extend well into the Gulf. It could extend well into the, of course, into the East Coast, which is going to be it's going to be a very challenging forecast in that area going forward. So this is just another indicator that this hurricane season has the potential to be quite nasty. And remember, as you all know, it only takes one system, of course, but we just need to be watching this together. The last thing I want to point out today is a bit of an international update. Take note, France, back toward normal temperatures, which is great. We got the Olympics going there soon, so to not see oppressive heat. I'm actually just now finishing a great book called Boys in the Boat. I know it was a big movie, I think last year or this year. I wanted to read the book before I saw it. That book is amazing. I hope if you love to read, which I do, I could just spend the whole day reading. It's a very, very good book, and it talked about the Berlin Games in 1936 and the crew from Washington. It's a great, great book. But they were talking about how terribly cold and wet and windy it was. And so certainly a far cry from what we're seeing this year at the Olympics. Okay, last thing to talk about here is the precip. Take a look at this. We're starting to now see better evidence of more rain through Ukraine. Pockets of dryness throughout Russia, but better chances for precipitation. And a lot of this is because of the opening up the Bermuda High and what it's doing to change the trough pattern across much of Europe. So really keying in on better chances of rain across some key acres in this area. So we'll be watching that. Otherwise, the Indian monsoon having the big surge in the middle part of India. But take note, around the Yangtze River, which remember was flooding back in spring, is now much drier while there's better rains in the North China Plain and Manchurian Plain. So we're going to stop there. I hope you all have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk again tomorrow. I'll be coming to you from Macon, Georgia. So have a good one. Thanks.